Okay, so welcome everyone to the Fishbowl session. So for people who do not know what a fishbowl is, it's essentially supposed to be a discussion with a large audience. But to facilitate this discussion, there are going to be a number of chairs. In our case, there are 5 chairs. And because this is a hybrid workshop, so usually there's a fixed set of chairs. In our case, there will be 3 fixed chairs. Now there are 4, okay. And then 2 variable chairs. And these variable chairs can be filled by audience members. And so questions come from the audience, and they will be answered by the panel. And the variable chairs will just go out, and new members come in. And so we discuss this, whatever topic there is. And so since there is also virtual attendance, at least one chair is going to be virtual, so that people, or one person who's attending virtually will virtually sit here effectively. So can we just do a mic check? So can anyone, maybe by Shaki, can you just unmute yourself and say something so we know that the sound works?
Hello.
Okay, works, good. Okay, so we can start with some open-ended questions and some open-ended discussion, and we have some specific questions prepared as well. So Sripati met me on the lobby earlier, and he said that he has some complaints and some challenges. So if you want, you can maybe start asking some questions, or.
Sure. Thanks, Marcel. So I'm probably the first audience person here. I will say that when I submitted to this workshop, it was a pre-registration protocol that really interested me because I think that has great potential for improving the experimental standards in our community. I am an experimentalist. I do performance modeling in my main role, and I think a lot about experimental design and other things like that. And having this kind of pre-registered protocol was really awesome. That was, the pitch at the beginning. So after we submitted, we got reviews, major revision, by the way, and so on and so forth. I had some thoughts about how we could make this better. And I think there are some issues with using pre-registered protocols for the work we do. One is our experimental designs change significantly from experiment to experiment. Whereas for clinical trials, for example, you have to decide parameters, but it's mostly fixed. So that's one. The second thing is we should try to prevent the standard reviewer 2 issues from affecting our process. Like, what are the complaints that people can make about your experimental design and what they cannot? And although after many years we will come up with such a list, I think the best way to do that right now is to also publish the reviews that you get from your pre-registered reports along with the pre-registered report. So I'll stop there as a concrete suggestion.
Anyone here or anyone in the audience who wants to talk about publishing reviews?
But I guess one thing that I wanted to comment on was that obviously the same the same issues may apply for regular paper reviews, right? And I think that what I do like a lot about this pre-registration model is that any changes that the reviewers ask you to do are basically early in the process, as I was saying this morning, when changes are still relatively cheap to make, right, before you ran the experiments, or you only ran preliminary experiments, while for a typical journal submission, for instance, when you get major reviews, it might mean that you actually need to rerun everything from scratch, and for certain papers, this might be like a matter of, could even be a matter of weeks or a month of experiments.
So just to clarify, the reason to publish the reviews would be to help iteratively put together a set of standards to work these out.
Right.
Which my question is do we actually need to make the reviews public for this one, or this could be something that so somebody needs to work out these standards, and maybe it's enough if those people who work on this have access to these.
I think Baishaki wants to say something.
Yeah, I think eventually we can also think about this open review format, where at least the reviewer and the writers the authors can have some scope of discussion to make it a little bit even more transparent.
Yeah, so these are standards in machine learning. There are open reviews, and so I personally don't have an opinion on whether we should publish reviews or not. I think that reviewers should be accountable for their reviews, but at the same time, in this setup, the reviewers are expected to essentially provide feedback. They're not going to judge. They're of course going to judge whether the paper is going to be accepted or not, but more likely than not, there's going to be a revision, because revision is cheap. There's a revision proposal on experimental design, and so maybe it's not necessary to publish, but I don't have a strong opinion on that.
So I'd like to just respond a little bit. So one of the probable misconceptions is that revision is cheap. We certainly want revision to be cheap, but the specific revisions that I was asked to do were certainly not cheap. It was more of this, hey, you're doing X approach, but you should try Y approach. Essentially change the entire experimental protocol to accommodate the opinions of one reviewer. And I kind of saw in the reviews that the group pushed back on that. So I'm not complaining about that specific instance. But we do not want the kind of reviews we get in ordinary papers to come back over here, right? So Anders Zeller, I think, has a nice list of review, suggestions or standards, and we could definitely incorporate that. So that's one thing. The open review sounds really great. That's very nice. I don't intend for reviews from this particular instance to be published. I think reviewers must agree to that before we publish that. So, but this is something we should consider for future iterations of this framework.
Cool. So is anyone else here who wants to share some experience or some thoughts on pre-registration? You can come.
I think I'm loud enough.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the same thing that has been raised before, that experiments can be very stochastic in nature sometimes. So I really like the idea that with the pre-registration, there's more focus on the experimental design. But what if during the course of the research, we find out that, well, there's an offshoot idea that has really good results, and then the follow-up work actually has little of the experimental design because of that stochastic nature, but the results are really good. What are your thoughts on how we should accommodate that in those submissions?
Yeah, so once a paper and the experimental design, and so the entire paper is in principle accepted, you are essentially asked to follow that experimental design. But of course, yeah, things happen, and so maybe you find out that this cannot be implemented or something like that. So what happens is there's going to be a deviation. So we are not, I don't know whether we have a mechanism for this deviation yet, but what we know is that we can at least during the submission in stage 2, which is the submission to the journal, allow for reasonable deviation from the experimental protocol. So there's no reason for the reviewer to disagree if the deviation itself was, has an explanation. So what we say is we confirm the experimental design and all deviations are explained. So, and that doesn't violate the in principle acceptance. But deviation, what makes a large enough deviation to not call it a small deviation anymore, is something which we could discuss. Yeah.
By the way, I was just curious to follow up on the previous point with open reviewing. I mean, I see this as an orthogonal issue with the pre-registration model. And in fact, the benefit of pre-registration model is that once you have the register report, you actually have, if you want, like an agreement with the reviewers. But I'm curious, nevertheless, to hear your thoughts about what problem this would solve, because I'm not immediately sure I understand the benefits in this context. Maybe I missed something.
So the theoretical problem, which is not really a problem in that it leads to more open science. People can see the reviews people got, and then there's some learning from that as to how they should structure their experiments in the future. So it kind of raises experimental standards over time. So reviewers don't keep pushing back on the same thing, and so on and so forth. So that's one. The second thing is that's in my opinion. It may or may not happen. Okay. This is a very social process. So the second complaint is that it pushes back against cultural norms, or it improves cultural norms, where reviewers can ask for things that are unreasonable for a protocol. I mean, suppose somebody submits a fairly decent protocol, but people kind of push back and say, hey, this is, so let me just push back. Let me just make it crisp. How would you react to a protocol that you think would not work? Right? And how do we handle a reviewer who strongly holds that opinion?
I mean, I think we need guidelines. I mean, obviously, I think that in general, obviously, the PC chairs are there to moderate this. Other reviewers, of course, are also supposed to moderate the discussion and catch such cases. But I think more importantly, is to have these guidelines for reviewing. And I think that a good example is what ICSI has done this year. I know. The PC chairs, Andrea Zeller, who gave the first keynote at the workshop, and Dana Damian were put together these reviewer guidelines, which I found very useful, and in fact they are publicly available for everyone to look at. And I think the authors could also refer to this when. If there are any issues with the review. So I think this is something that indeed could be, and I think should be adopted more broadly, right? So any other issues that people would like to raise? Sebastian.
Thanks, Christian. Someone talked about deviation from the author point of view, but there may be also the reviewer point of view. Sometimes you may do the experiments, and there is something which happens, which is very, I don't know, for one class of problem, it works very, very well or very, very badly. And the reviewer will ask, I try to explain now. But in that case, can the author say just, no, I have my agreement, I don't care? How do we handle this kind of things?
Can you take a seat, perhaps? Yes. So sorry, are you saying that, just to clarify the question, are you saying that the question is if the results are not correctly interpreted, or?
No, more when you get the new results, some new questions naturally arise. I mean, if you have 3 reviewers, the 3 reviewers will come with the same exact question looking at the new result. But obviously, you cannot know in advance you will have such question because you didn't have the data. And, sometimes, and can the author just hide behind the agreement to just not do the effort of explaining why or such things?
So the question is, we have in principle approval, so in principle acceptance for an experimental protocol, but we find something new, but we don't need to explain it.
Yeah, in some way, since it was not in the initial protocol or in the initial agreement, can the author just ignore that? Or can if all the reviewer agrees, can they enforce this new kind of question or whatever? Is it something interactive or is it just fixed and you have only to do what the agreement is and that's it, in a kind of a bureaucratic way in some way?
So the question is then, what is the leverage or what is the data then that the authors can deviate from? From the agreed upon experimental protocol. So firstly, we assume, of course, that the authors are benign authors, and so we don't have any expectations on the results. And when they find something in these results, of course, I mean, because this is a scientific investigation, and hopefully they're also gonna explain and maybe follow up a little bit. So that I think this follow up is entirely within the experimental protocol. That's at least my opinion. But so I wonder what other people say about that. How much can people deviate from the experimental protocol that is agreed upon?
Shi, would you like to comment? Is there a raised hand?
It was just a raised hand for another question. Maybe we should complete this discussion before I ask the questions.
All right, I see. It's a different question. I thought you'd like to address this one. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Marcel. I mean, first of all, I think the authors, I would expect that, if they see there is an interesting or an unexplained aspect in the results, they would like to conduct additional experiments, for instance, to clarify that or look into this. Now, in terms of the protocol, I mean, I would say it's reasonable for review. Now, I think it depends on how of the kind of issues that we're talking about in the results, and I would say that if this is something critical, then I would say it's reasonable for reviewers in stage 2 to actually raise this and ask for another revision, right? But in principle, I mean, it should be well justified why that revision is necessary, because in principle, if the authors do follow the proposed methodology, that should be fine. But I could imagine, as you say, cases in which yes, I mean, you would need to follow up, and I mean, again, it's very hard to, obviously this is science, and this, I don't think this should be interpreted as a legal contract either, and I think as long as the feedback is in good faith, and and I think it's well justified, then I think, yeah, I think that would be reasonable. At least this is my opinion.
Yeah, maybe we can think about this as a minimal work when we have an in-principle acceptance. Stage 1, the stage 1 submission after revision is like a minimal contract. And then whenever you find something new in the results, then of course you should at least conduct the experiments as you promised. But if you do additional experiments on top of that, I think that should be possible.
So I have a kind of follow-up question. What happens if the results turn out to be negative, like the authors cannot reproduce the expected results? Not reproduce, produce the expected results.
So that's
I mean, are we open to publish negative result and this whole experience as well?
So the outcome of the experiment is not under agreement in stage 1. The outcome of the experiment can be negative, can be positive. So that's essentially one of the main advantages of this approach. And another part of this question is, what if it just takes too long to conduct these experiments, or you find a PhD student doesn't want to work on this anymore, or so what happens after stage 1 if there's no submission? Is this work then as register report? Is this then who can work on this, right? So if the main authors who's proposed to work on that don't want to work on this anymore, is that a claimed work? Or so one thought that Christian and I had was to essentially put an expiry date on a work, essentially, once you get in principle acceptance. A possible idea to account for this fact that after in principle acceptance you don't submit stage two is to simply revoke the in principle acceptance after, say, a year or some arbitrary period of time. Vaishaki.
So if, say, do not submit in, say, stage 2, can they submit anywhere else?
I would say that would be kind of weird. So
I think
maybe after that expiration date, for which the 8 years is probably too long, but maybe like 1 year or something like that.
Yeah, that's the way I see it too. Maybe Christian has some.
No, I mean, I think the agreement is that you're going to submit to this venue.
No, but again, Christian, again, we are not assuming the authors are, malicious, but say a graduate student is gone or something happened, right? So at that point, they could not produce the result or outcome. But say after 5 months, thing came back to the normal, then what will happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for the authors to communicate, any issues that arise, and communicate to the organizers. To understand whether, and I could imagine cases in which, for instance, there might be a good justification for getting an extension, right, to producing the stage 2 results. And in fact, this is something that we could discuss, right, about the process, right? So for instance, with stage 2, do we want to have like a fixed deadline, right? Or do we want to be more flexible, right? To say, you have 1 year, to submit your results. Of course, we encourage you to do it as early as possible. There are advantages and disadvantages, of course, with the when you have a fixed deadline, things are easier to organize. That's the truth. You have, that at that date you need to solicit reviews again, and otherwise, if they keep coming at irregular times, the submissions obviously they're harder to handle. But I think that is indeed like something that we do need to. It's subject to discussion.
Does anyone have thoughts on this?
Actually, if I can make a comment on this.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually I had one of my questions was regarding the timeline and having this deadline for the second phase deadline. Because to my point of view, for some papers, they may get these experiments done sooner than that deadline. And in many cases, we want this work to be published, to be seen sooner than probably a couple months, in this case, August. So is this something that you have thought about, that we could submit earlier potentially, so that the work will be seen by the public earlier? And I understand there could be logistic issues organizing with the journals, of course, but I'm just wondering if this is something that you have thought about.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for this first instance, it's perhaps a bit difficult to move things forward, just because we're still, as I was saying, we're still negotiating with TOSEM about the process, and we haven't done this before. So, in fact, it might be that we'll need to push some deadlines back by some time, depending on how quickly we can agree on a process with TOSEM. But I think more generally, right, like looking beyond this first instance, yeah, I mean, I think that is, as I said, yeah, subject to discussion. We could imagine a model, and perhaps there are advantages to this model where people can submit their revisions as soon as it is available. It puts some extra effort, if you want, or unpredictability on the reviewer side, right? It's a bit like a journal submission, right, where reviewers are expected to review the revisions whenever the revision arrives, right, within some time after that. But I think if the expectations are made clear in the beginning, I hope that reviewers would be happy with this model, and then yeah, you would offer like full flexibility, and it looks like this is what she and Baishaki and others are arguing for.
Yeah, in fact, we started with a survey like when we first announced this idea with a blog post some time back. We also added a survey and then asked people what they think about this idea. And we got many positive, very, very positive responses. But one of the questions were Shi's question, like what happens? Like one of the concerns was that this might prolong the publication, right? So you have now this elaborate stage 1, stage 2 process, which then goes through a workshop and then to a journal. Doesn't it just take very long? And so maybe the answer is to have stage 1 like a normal workshop. Because you don't actually do the experiments, you can conceive the idea and then submit to this workshop pretty quickly. And then from the workshop, you're like, I don't know, we don't know whether we should do the revision after the workshop like we have now, or before the workshop. This is also subject to discussion, by the way. So now we have it after the workshop. And so once you have the in-principle approval, you can directly submit as soon as you have the experiments ready. And so the time that you spend in this project is entirely controlled by you and not by us. So that doesn't seem to be, like in this kind of setup, if you're able to, if we can negotiate to have like arbitrary deadlines for the journal for stage 2, there should not be any overhead.
But can I ask as a follow-up to this? So, would people? So basically, I think there's also the question of where what's the role of a workshop in in this process, and at what point in time we should have this workshop, right? So one model is the one that we used this year, where you submit to the workshop, you get these conditionally accepted register reports that you present here, you get additional feedback, and then you submit, the final version of, or you submit a revised version. I mean, I guess that could also be subject to further revisions, but you submit the final version of the register report, and then you start working on the full paper. Another model would be to have, for instance, just some extended abstracts for the fuzzing workshop, let's say. Then you discuss here for the first time, the idea and the experiment design. You get some feedback, and then you write the register report, which so basically you have a single, so you have the workshop before the register report submission. Right, so and for the workshop, you would submit like an extended abstract with the idea, right? So I'm wondering whether what people think about this. These different models. And yet another one that I think Marcel and I discussed this morning was that so the third one would be even to have like the fuzzing workshop where you present the full papers, right? So basically you do this process independently, and then when the paper is ready,
cycle back, yeah.
Or you could even have both. I think, Marcel, you're saying that you could have both in the sense that, for instance, next year you would have some presentations, about if we do it early in the cycle, some presentation like this year about new register reports and also presentations of the full papers. Right? So I don't know. There are many different models that one can imagine following. So I'm wondering whether there are thoughts and preferences. Anybody wants to comment from here in the beginning? Or,
I like the presenting both, like pre-registration from next year and the full paper from this year, at least for the next fuzzing workshop, because this will give us kind of both end, see all of us how things are going, and then we can again look back and take the next step.
Any other thoughts?
I also do like the idea of being able to present the final papers and the final results. In this first instance, the final results will be published in a journal. But maybe someday, if this grows out itself, it might be part of a conference where the final papers could be published as well.
Yeah, so let me say something positive, and then we can try to hack that problem, hack that process. So firstly, I'm really excited about the pre-registration idea, because it can kind of repair the kind of judgment that we have now, where we only see accept and reject, and it turns this into some kind of a more collaborative effort, where people can actually give feedback while the work is being conceived. And people that, for instance, we have heard this keynote in the morning from Andreas Seller was talking about these two kind of cultures. So suppose one culture, software engineering, members of the software engineering community are submitting to a security conference. The expectations are very different, particularly on experimental design. So with this kind of pre-registration approach, people from the software engineering community submitting to the security community would see what the expectations are on experimental design, and would see what the expectations are on novelty, and before they actually start doing these experiments and then submitting to the wrong community. So this establishing community standards is maybe also an answer to Shripati's question in the beginning. We discuss community standards here at the workshop and in the peer review process, because we are talking about experimental design a lot more than in the peer review process, which is a benefit, and because you can integrate communities in this way much better. Also, there are author biases, reviewer biases, stronger starts, and so on. We all know that. And the greatest thing of this is that we today announced that we are going to collaborate with ACM TOSM, which is a journal, and this is of course not fully confirmed, but fairly certain. And this means that one of the top journals in software engineering feels a commitment towards this idea, and so I'm sure that we see this not only within fuzzing but in other parts of the community. So this is the positive thing. So let's try to see how we can attack this model. So we already saw we can. So one thing that how we can attack this is we could just publish a lot of register reports or submit a lot of register reports and then just work on whatever report is being accepted. I call it DDoSing. So we're just submitting a lot of reports and then work on that. So how do you know, do you have any idea how we can rectify this, or is this a problem at all, or what does everyone think? So firstly, our experience is that this has not happened. I mean, the other thing is people are concerned that you would submit negative results that were rejected elsewhere, and we only receive negative results. This is also a concern that the people raise. So for the DDoS thing, I think is just something that we didn't see. Okay, and for the negative results thing and for the rejected paper thing people still get feedback on their experimental design and on the novelty of the approach. And even if they already have a lot of results, if there are flaws in experimental design and the reviewers tell that the experimental design has to be changed, still the authors are essentially requested to accommodate the patched experimental design and rerun the experiments, which still improves the work. So when the paper then is accepted, finally with the new set of results, even if it was rejected elsewhere, it was improved.
Yeah, just I want to follow up on this idea with negative results and emphasize that for me, I think that's actually a major benefit of this publication model, that you can publish interesting negative results. Of course, there are many negative results which are not interesting, and that's why in the first stage, the significance of the idea, the novelty, of course, are criteria that can be used to get rid of uninteresting negative results. But right now, it's very hard to publish interesting negative results, and unfortunately, there are many, I think, such interesting negative results which are not published and from which the community would really benefit, right? You know that this approach was tried, you learned some lessons for why things have not worked. And I think with this model, indeed, you can publish such results, and I think that is important. And in the end, I think if the reviewers in stage one, they deem the results interesting, based on evaluating the significance and the novelty and the experiment design, then yes, the paper should be published, right? Those experiments should be conducted, and the paper published.
So Christian, I actually have a follow-up question on the negative result. So what should be our expectations, in the sense that how much the authors should try to investigate the negative result? Because say if we have a model where we are allowing negative result, I can do, within my experimental setting, I can do a very trivial thing and publish a negative result, right? Or I can go deep, I can dig deep into it, figure out, usually the way we do, right, in the expectation for positive result, and try to see where things can go positive. So where is the boundary?
Yeah, I think this goes down to Sebastian's question regarding what's expecting in stage 2, and I guess the same kind of discussion applies. Obviously, the authors should try to understand exactly. It should try to properly analyze the results rather than just report them, right? So.
Yeah, maybe a small comment on that. Especially, for positive result, in some way, people study one possible instantiation of their technique. If it works, then everybody is happy. So, but for negative result, you cannot just say, okay, I have this parameter, it doesn't work, because does it mean the technique doesn't work, or does it mean just your instantiation doesn't work? So if people try hard and kind of explore the space and give rationale, then yeah, I guess that's very good work indeed.
Yes, I agree. But even if, you can't explore all the possibilities, but some of them, that's also, some incremental, new knowledge.
More than one configuration.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so another question that we discussed was, or that we got, was that whether we should publish the register reports. So should we make this publicly available? Because this means that here in this case for this workshop, you wanted to publish most of the authors that submitted papers and got to present here chose to publish, and one of the reasons might be because this funding related, you want to travel here, and so you want to show that you have a paper accepted. But does it make sense? Do you want to conduct your experiments in private, or do you want to conduct these experiments in public?
So I think they should be published, but there could be a time of embargoing the publication so that it remains confidential until the final thing is submitted. That would probably solve that problem. But it should be published because, pre-registration is a formal process. It does not need to be published in a journal or something like that, but it needs to be publicly accessible. I think that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, also I agree that they should be published, but what about, I don't know, papers that get rejected at the second round of the pre-registration? Maybe they failed to the experiments, no? So can this bar the novelty? Maybe the authors want to improve the experiment and submit to another journal and conference. Probably this can bar the novelty and they get desk reject, I don't know, from the second conference because there is the report at the Fuzzing workshop, but not the final paper because they got rejection at the second stage. How do you have an idea how to, I don't know, handle this kind of situation?
Sorry, can you say again? So the scenario is that you got rejected from the second stage?
Yeah, then so you don't publish the final paper at the journal because you got rejected, and maybe you want to fix your stuff and publish to another conference. It's not related to the Fuzzing workshop. And this conference can give you desk reject because a similar paper, so the registered report, already appeared to the workshop, in theory.
Yeah, I think that obviously you do need to, I think that I would say that the same rules would apply for publishing a workshop paper that you extend into a full conference paper or publishing an idea paper that you later, again extend. I think you do need to refer to that work. Obviously, if the submission is double-blind, you do need to follow the requirements and the guidelines, for properly referring to the previous work. But yeah, if the paper was rejected in stage 2 and the process has finished with essentially the pre-registration model, then I think you can submit to another venue. But yeah, you do need to reference that register report and explain basically what it is. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yes, essentially conditional on publishing the registered reports. So if you don't publish the registered reports at all, then this is not a problem, right?
Yeah. This was an argument in favor of not publishing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think another argument, by the way, regarding not publishing, I mean, we had a discussion this morning about the relationship with the journal first paper. So at least in software engineering, they are quite, I'm not sure if in security journals do this, but in software engineering journals, if you publish a paper first in the journal, so it's not an extension of a conference paper, you have the chance to present it at one of the top software engineering conferences, right? Now, with the register report published before, I mean, I think there is this question of whether that counts as a journal first publication or not, right? And of course, this also goes to whether we'd like, for instance, the fuzzing papers to be, the full papers to be presented at the workshop. Of course, you couldn't also present them at the conference at journal first. But yeah, I'm just throwing this out because yeah, that's also another aspect if you decide to publish the register report, right? Sebastian, I thought you wanted to speak as well.
No, but I was happy with your answer. So I guess one of my concerns if we are too liberal on this, on considering the workshop paper as kind of publication, then there may be a risk that some team just spam all, results. And so obviously we are not malicious researchers, but you don't need that many malicious people in some institution to have some problems. So.
That's what Marcel was saying. I guess this issue of submitting lots of register reports.
Yeah, I mean, you can also even bar people that would submit too many register reports, but yeah, I assume that most people will just use that. Also, I mean, the spirit of this entire endeavor is collaboration, and so.
So it's kind of a related question or say comment. So my experience is that when you publish a paper, even in a workshop, probably you burn your chances to get accepted to top conferences like NDSS and similars. Perhaps, I mean, if you have a different experience, tell me, because I would be very happy to hear that. So I'm wondering, I mean, you are here, the workshop is part of NDSS. Did you have any chance to discuss with the chairs of NDSS to see whether, rather than the journal, also the NDSS conference could be a good, receiver of the next step? Because that could be really the perfect situation. You have a workshop with the idea that has been evaluated, you have a conference, good conference, that receive the overall results, and then perhaps you have a journal where you do a small extension of the idea in some of the remaining direction, and you add a few experiments, and you have the standard situation that was in place, 15 years ago, where PhD students workshop, getting feedback, conference, and then journal to finalize the journey. I don't know, did you think about that? Did you have any discussion with the NDSS chairs in that respect? Or?
I think there are three responses that I can give. So the first is, you already get a promise to get published in a journal. When you publish here, the promise is that you will be published. If you follow everything, you'll be published in a journal. So that's the first. The second is, we thought about this long term already, and we also thought about this outside of fuzzing, more generally about software engineering or security research. So maybe Christian can talk about this when he gets the microphone. So the second aspect that I think Christian can talk about. But the third aspect is, if your process was flowed from workshop into a conference into a journal, I think that's. So my opinion is this is too much reviewing. Like we have now 2 stages and 3 points where people review. The first review is the most elaborate for the workshop. It's reviewing the register reports, giving all that feedback. Then the revision is going to be lightweight. And then another time is stage 2 reviews. So when you have when you have a conference in between, it sounds like 3 stages, and that there might be too much reviewing, and there's no purpose of stage 2 or stage 3 in this. So my opinion is workshop journal is fine. Journal is, but I understand in security, journals don't matter, right? In software engineering they do.
Yeah, and we were considering like what are potential final venues for the final papers, and I mean, a conference was an option too. It was mostly, because of various practical and timing things why we went with the journal. But yeah, again, this is, I think, as we mentioned earlier, a conference would work similarly for the final papers. But yeah, I mean, that's maybe for future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the previous thoughts. I mean, what I want to say is that I can also see a model, or I can see, I guess the model is not the right word, an instantiation of this where you would submit in the second stage to a conference, and this conference could also be NDSS. I guess one thing that we wanted to do. At least this year, with this effort, was also to bridge the two communities of software engineering and security, because fuzzing, I think it is at the intersection of these communities. There are, in fact, other communities that work on this as well, but definitely software engineering and security are two of the main communities. And then we thought that, we'd like to have, in the first stage, let's say a security venue, and in the second stage a software engineering venue, right? So this was also like one of our objectives, and that's why we didn't talk to NDSS about this possibility, and we looked for the second stage for a software engineering venue. But yeah, again, I mean, I do hope that pre-registration takes, is adopted more widely, because I think actually one thing that we didn't discuss, I think there are also papers that indeed would not be in scope for this publication model, but there are definitely many papers which are a fantastic fit, and I think that the pre-registration model does offer numerous advantages. So we'd like to see this adopted more broadly. So one thing that we've also discussed with TOSEM and Mauro, the editor-in-chief, is very interested in starting a pre-registration track at TOSEM that for which I'm also interested in leading as associate editor there, but. And this would be more broadly for the software engineering community. But I would love to see, perhaps one of you might also like to take this further with the security community, right? To actually do this specifically within the security community, right? So I think there are. Yeah, I mean, I think that basically, the pre-registration model would work very well in different contexts, right? And I could see it being instantiated in different contexts, right? So this is just one instantiation that we have tried this year.
There is a hand on Zoom.
Is it an old hand or a new one?
Yeah, if I may ask another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so I actually would like to ask a question to see if you have any insights from the reviewer's perspective. Because when I think about this publication model, when the reviewers see the pre-registered report, there is a big chunk of the paper that is missing, a regular paper that is missing the evaluation. I'm not just talking about if the result is positive or negative, but also, as we have discussed, if these results could potentially result in an insight, which is an important part of the paper. So I'm wondering if the reviewers receive any specific guidelines and instructions when they are asked to review those pre-registered reports, and what feedback do you get on if they could judge the novelty and the significance of paper, as usual, with that big part missing?
Yeah, so we did prepare reviewer expectations, and we did, we had a lot of exchange with PC members, send emails on expectations that, because this is a new model, right? So everyone is new, we are new, PC members are new, authors are new. And this is also the reason for this Fishbowl session, to understand expectations and negotiate this. So we had a conversation with the PC members. It was mostly re-explaining, but I think it's important to prepare a set of expectations, just how to evaluate the work. Like the two criteria that we had is assess the novelty and significance of the work, and evaluate the soundness and reproducibility of the experimental methodology. So these are the two reviewing criteria. We can work on this, but like this is how we started, and just like what this means. A few more details. We also provided the process and so on. So this is a conversation, and we're really happy to continue this conversation and kind of understand which kind of expectations everyone has, and we should also give to the reviewers and the authors.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think that would be really useful, since this is probably the first experiment of this, and if you can sort of prepare a report or a checklist of like the important things the reviewers should be careful about, I think that would be very useful for the next iterations.
Yeah, if you have like any feedback as an author on like things that you think should have been evaluated or should not have been evaluated, just let us know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point, and we should consider preparing a sort of report, or so we had an initial blog post that we all four of us co-authored describing this initiative, and I think when the first instance of this is over, we could actually, I think it would be a good idea to reflect on it and also try to get feedback from authors and reviewers, and because as Marcel was saying, I think this is still something that we're all learning, right, to see what's the best way to apply these principles. So I think with this we should wrap up. I think this was very useful to get feedback from everyone, and we're happy to actually get additional feedback. Please send us a message, or talk to us in a break if you have further feedback that you'd like to share with us.